Hey guys, welcome back to a new video by Biology with Xuan. So today we are going to continue the series of chapter 9, which is the transport in animals. So some of my previous videos, especially for this topic, has been split into part 1 and part 2. So now I have just tried my best to retain it as only one single video, and you can just complete all of it here. If you have any questions within this chapter, please feel free to comment in the comment section below, and let's get to it. Alright, so today for this content, there's 4 subtopics here, which is the circulatory systems, the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood. Alright, and then we're going to start out with our first part, which is the circulatory system. So as usual, the learning outcomes is very important in the entire IGCSE biology syllabus because these are some of the questions that the syllabus can actually give you a hint on like what kind of answer they're expecting first, and what kind of questions they might ask from the questions or from the syllabus itself as a reference. So that's why this is a very important one. So for the circulatory system, you must know that to describe the circulatory system as a system of blood vessels with pump and valves to ensure one-way flow of blood. For the extended students only, you just need to know what is the single circulation of a fish, the double circulation of a mammal, and lastly, explain the advantages of a double circulation. Okay, but we're going to go through all one by one here. So, the circulatory system, so from the word circulatory, it comes from the word circulation. It means that they are actually going around in almost like a circle. Okay, it starts from somewhere and it ends somewhere. It either starts from the heart, let's say for example, and ends with the heart also. It comes back and then it recycles. So that is known as a circulation. So a circulatory system is a system of blood vessels with a pump and valves to ensure one-way flow of blood. So like from the definition itself, I think it's self-explanatory here, is that there will be something that's connecting the heart, let's say for example, and how is it going to be transported to certain parts of our body that really needs that oxygen supply. So that is something that we have to be very we have to really understand a lot, is that because all of these are interconnected. Alright, so I'm sure you see these 2 diagrams, so do not worry about it. At this level, you just need to know this diagram and not this. But what I can tell you is that this is just the diagram on the left hand side, which is here, is actually one of the rather most simplified diagram, okay, that you can see for the circulatory system. As you go deeper, if you are actually going into more bio, then you actually see that there are actually more than just a few vessels and a few veins or arteries that you know. Okay, so the first part that you have to know is the circulation of a fish. So why I pick up fish, or why the syllabus even chose fish, is because first of all, they are a single circulation. So what I told you previously is that we have 2 types of circulation. One is a single circulation, another is a double circulation. So in the case of a fish, it actually works in a single circulation. So what does this mean by a single circulation? It means that the heart of the fish have only 2 chambers. Chambers means like 2 parts. Okay, they have like I can't really think of a synonym, but it basically means 2 parts. The heart is only has 2 compartments only. Okay, that's another way to say it. But blood only flows through the heart once in a single circuit. It leaves from the heart and comes back to the heart one time, just one time. Okay, it just flows through it once. So that's just what I mean by single circulation. So when exam questions ask you to describe, you must be able to say that the single circulation works by blood flowing through the heart once in a circuit, in one circuit, something like that. Okay, now more importantly is the circulation of mammals, which is one of the few examples that I can give is the human. Humans are the more we are humans, we know ourselves better than other animals. Okay, that's one thing. So it is a double circulation. So now everything just times 2, meaning there are 4 heart chambers or 4 compartments in the heart. We'll go through that later. And blood flows through the heart twice in a single circuit. Okay, you may not understand how would that work now, but a gist of an idea is that it goes through the heart twice in one circuit or one time. So the right side of the heart will receive deoxygenated blood, okay, and the left side of the heart will receive oxygenated blood. We will go through to see where is the right side of the heart, where is the left side of the heart, and why does it specifically bring oxygenated blood, and another side brings in deoxygenated blood. We'll go through that at the next part. Okay, so again, the reason why humans we have advantages of this circulation and not using the single circulation is these are the few answers that in mark schemes they've already mentioned, and it must be correct. And I tell you, it don't just limits with one or two answers. There's always more than that. So feel free to explore to see which one you can understand better. Try not to memorize it. Okay. So first, it separates oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood to ensure efficient supply of oxygen. Okay, so I'm sure you know that there has to be some separation. You can't have both of it mixing together. Then what is the point of breathing in and out when you're having a mixture of blood? You wouldn't want that. Okay. And next, the left ventricle pumps blood at a higher pressure to the body. So you may not understand this now, why the left ventricle specifically pumps that. But for now, you should know that, you just need to know that it pumps at a higher pressure. At the right ventricle, it pumps at a lower pressure. Why is that? Because it is to prevent lung capillary damage. Again, we'll go through this in the next part. I think this is just more of to really have a slight understanding, a basic understanding now. And also it allows more time for gas exchange. That actually relates back to this part. And it also allows filtration in the kidneys and maintain a higher metabolic rate. This one we'll go through during the excretion chapter in the next few videos. Okay, now we'll go through what is the heart. This is more important, and I'm sure that you may be scared, okay, that you have to memorize something here. Yes, you do, but practice makes perfect. Okay. Alright, so again, the learning outcomes for this time point 2 is just to identify the diagrams and the images in the structure. State that the blood is pumped away from the heart in the vessels. State the activity of the heart can be monitored by a few items. Investigate and describe the effect of, like, let's say, exercising on the heart rate. Describe coronary heart disease, which is a very common disease that a lot of people have as they come to older ages, okay, or as they grow as a later stage of adult life. Then you can see more of coronary heart disease, and also the roles of diet and exercise to reduce that disease. And extended students, you need to know a few valves, okay, we should go through again. And you also need to know like how to explain the relative thickness of certain compartments. Certain chambers are thicker than another, and why is that? We'll go through this later. And what is the importance of a septum, which actually separates the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood. And describe the function of the heart in terms of how it contracts, okay, and the action of the valves that sends blood from one place to another. And lastly, we have to again explain the effect of physical activity on heart rate. Okay, so now you're going to look at a few images of the heart, but I want to ask you that you need to know the positions of it. Where is the left side of the heart? Where is the right side of the heart? Okay, so you may be confused now that I say that the left side of the heart, which is, let's say, this is the heart. If I tell you that now you're seeing in my screen or this video right now is that this part is the left hand side and this is the right hand side, you are wrong. Okay, in anatomy, okay, the position that we see is based on, like when we are standing, right, our left is this side already. Okay, when we are standing, okay, when we are, let's say we are looking straight, we are standing, just standing straight, okay, so your left will become this side. Okay, I'm sure, I hope you understand me. And the right hand side will be this right hand side, which is, when you are seeing this video, is at your left hand side. So that's a bit confusing, but just think of like how when you're standing up, this is your view. The left side is the left side, the right side is the right side. But what you see in videos or what you see in the screen is the other way around. Okay, so this is a structure that you need to be familiar of. very, very important. This actually is a very important part, okay, that you need to know. First of all, again, in any of my videos, it's very important that you know what is the structure and what is the function. So I'm sure you see a lot of labelings here, okay? So again, they've already tell you that this is the left side of the heart and this is the right side of the heart. But let's look at the left side first, okay? So we have the pulmonary vein. When I mention pulmonary means the lungs, okay? And the vein is the one that carries. But you also need to be very, very important to know that pulmonary veins works very differently to arteries, okay? Then we're going to look through that later. So I'm going to imagine that, let's say the blood is coming from the lungs, will be entering the pulmonary vein. It will enter this part known as the left atrium. Okay, so left atrium is the first compartment that arrives here. So after it reaches here, you look at the arrow, it goes down to this part, which is the left ventricle, which is the second compartment. Okay, and what actually brings in is the heart valves. So the valves are like something that can open and also shut. Okay, it can either be like this or up to allow blood to come in. So valves are the ones that are barriers. They open barriers when there's high pressure. So let's say at the left atrium, which is this part again, there's a lot of blood. I'm sure you know that pressure will increase. When pressure increases, what happens? The valves will open and they will allow blood to enter the left ventricle. So after, once again, the pressure in the left ventricle builds up, okay, then the valves on this side will open up. Okay, once it open up, then it will move to what we call as the aorta. So aorta is also known as a artery. It's a type of artery. And there's a very easy mnemonic that you can really understand quickly about arteries. Like A for arteries means away the heart. It goes away from the heart. Alright, so that's what known as an aorta. Okay, so now we look at the right hand side. So the right hand side is, let's say blood is come after the blood has been sent to the aorta and goes to the different parts of the body. Now it wants to return back to the heart. Remember, this is a double circulation. It goes through your heart twice in one single time. So vena cava, we send the blood in. Okay, I use a better color here. So it will enter this part known as the right atrium. So right atrium is the third chamber that we are seeing. So once again, when the blood starts to fill in the atrium, pressure increases, what happens? The valves will open. Once the valves are open, it will enter to this part known as the right ventricle. This is the fourth chamber that now we have finally completed all the four chambers. So after blood has been accumulated again, once again, the valves will open. Okay, the valves will open up again and they will shoot up. And where is it going? To the pulmonary arteries, which is back to the lungs. Okay, now this is something that I want to emphasize on is that let's look at the thickness of the left ventricle. This is the left ventricle, this is the right ventricle. But look at the difference of the wall thickness versus the right ventricle. So now coming to this question, why is the left ventricle thicker than the right ventricle? Remember that the left ventricle is shooting to the aorta. Aorta is moving away to the heart. So once the blood is shot away to the heart, it needs to be at a very high pressure. Why? Because you need to send blood very, very fast to all the different tissues in your body. They need to undergo respiration quickly. Remember, if your tissues do not get enough oxygen, they will die. Okay, so that's why your muscles are thicker so that they have more power to eject the blood. Alright, so this is something that you have to make sense. Of course, when you have stronger muscles, you're able to take things more heavier because you have more capacity. But what you need to know is that blood will arrive more to that area because you have more tissues at that part. It needs to undergo respiration. Okay, so that's another thing that it's quite important here. And you can see the valves, right? We're going to go through the different valves. So we'll look through at the function. So like what I mentioned, these are all the things that I've just mentioned. But remember, try not to memorize these functions. Use this to go through this back this diagram again and see how the movement of blood follows. Once you understand the movement of blood from one side to another, it will make a lot of sense. So I know that in exams they won't really ask for definition, especially for this, but I want you to have the general understanding of like what are each part's functions are, what do they do. That is important. Okay, so the septum is one of the few definitions that they can test. I think from this entire list here, the septum is quite important. Okay, so like what I mentioned, the relative muscle wall thickness. Okay, the left ventricle is the thickest in the heart, then to the right ventricle, then to the atrium. Okay, so that is something that you have to be much familiar with. All right. Okay, so this is another few, it's quite wordy, I'm really sorry, but I think a lot of things I've already kind of explained here already. But once again, I will re-emphasize that blood is pumped away from the heart by the arteries, always followed by the A to the A, and returns to the heart in veins, so they're known as veins. The deoxygenated blood incoming from the body flows into the right atrium and via the vena cava. So we should go back to this. From the vena cava, it enters to the right atrium. So that sentence, what does it mean? So once the right atrium has filled the blood is pushed through what you know as the atrioventricular valve. Okay, so just now what I didn't mention to you is the names of the valves. So I'm sure you can see here is one valve, here's another valve. So this valve, both left and this is the right hand side, right and left, these are known as the atrioventricular valve. Or you can say AV valve. Okay, so these valves, what is actually the function? Okay, whether it's atrioventricular valve, whether it's semilunar valve, what does it do is to prevent the backflow of blood. They prevent blood from going back to its initial position. You want to make sure that blood is always flowing at one single direction. So once you have gone through this already, the ventricle contraction occurs. Contraction, I'm sure you know, is squeeze. When the muscle contracts, it's squeezed. It becomes actually smaller in size. So what happens? The blood is pushed into the pulmonary artery, which I mentioned before. This is the pulmonary artery. Okay, so what does it do? Through the semilunar valve. Okay, just like I mentioned, there's another valve that it helps to pump, which is actually these valves. Okay, so these are what we know as the semilunar valve. Semilunar valve. Or you can say SV valve, but it's best to write semilunar valve because that means the examiners know that you understand what is a SV valve. Alright, same thing for atrioventricular. I know it's very long, but it's a way to understand because AV valve can be anything. It could be anything. So that's why you have to be very specific. Atrioventricular valve. Alright. So what does it do now? So again, it helps to prevent the backflow of blood. So anytime you see questions asking what is the function of the atrioventricular valve, what is the function of the semilunar valve, the answer needs to be to prevent the backflow of blood. So the blood travels to the lungs, move through the capillaries and passing the alveoli. Oxygenated blood returns to the left atrium via the pulmonary vein, passes through the atrioventricular valve into the left ventricle, and the thicker muscle walls of the ventricle will contract to push the blood forcefully into the aorta and around the body. So I hope this actually makes sense now. So actually go through this one by one to really digest what is the function of this. Okay, we're going to go through a past year paper question, okay, on why sometimes question cannot be so direct already, like telling you that why is this, why is that. They'll give you what we know as a pressure graph, okay, your pressure and vessel graph. So the figure 1.2 shows the pressure of blood flowing through different blood vessels as it travels around the body. I know we haven't gone through the blood vessels yet, but the main key point is to say that explain the reasons for the changes in pressure seen in the arteries. So what can you see in the arteries? The blood pressure is super duper high. It's at 16 kPa, kilopascal, but then it reduces afterwards. So what is the purpose of this? Okay, So what I need to expect in your answers is that you must explain that it is caused by the contraction of muscle, caused by muscle contraction. Okay, of the, let's say, the left ventricle, because the left ventricle has the thickest muscle. So once the muscle contracts, it's about the same thing as physics. You know, when you have a piston, I'm sure you remember this diagram. When you have fluid inside here, when you start to compress, okay, when you start to compress, you push this in, so it gets the area is become much lesser. So same thing as the left ventricle. When it starts to squeeze, the muscle begins to contract. It squeezes, right? So what happens? The lesser the area, the increase the pressure, because I'm sure you know pressure equals to force over area. When your area has become lesser, your pressure will increase. So that's why the pressure will increase when the ventricles contract. Okay, that's it. 2 marks. That's just what I want to see in your answer. So you can see that, I mean, you don't really need to have physics, but I'm sure you know basic physics, okay, on how area, the reduction in the area will cause an increase in pressure. So even like this some applications from physics is also even possible in biology. So that's how you really learn things, is to really link from what you have learned here and there. Okay, so I hope this question actually helps out. Okay, now the next part is the activity of the heart. Because your heart keeps on contracting and relaxing, remember, it has to undergo contraction and it has to undergo relaxation. It can never happen at the same time. Same thing as your muscles. You cannot have both of your triceps and your biceps contracting at the same time. There is no way. I tell you, this is going to be very, very funny if that actually happens. So it contracts and relaxes. It gives your muscle to slow down a bit before you move on to your next contraction. Okay, so there's a point of doing this. So your heart's activity, because remember, something that I need to tell you is that the activity of the heart is mainly electrical. It means that there are impulses that has been spread around. So these are known as the electrical activity, and they spread impulse. So impulse is something like there's electrical generation and they spread to different parts of the cells. They also allow it to undergo contraction. You learn this in neurons in the central nervous system in chapter 14, the coordination of the human body. But now what I need to tell you is that the heart is made out mostly of electrical activity. So you can measure or monitor by using an ECG. ECG is called an electrocardiogram, which is actually this one. So you can see that you can detect the electrical activity of how the heart is doing. Is it contracting? Is it relaxing? Is the atrium contracting or is the atrium relaxing? So you use this to visualize it. The next one you can do is a pulse rate measurement. So I'm sure you know, I'm not sure whether you have done this in your physical education classes, that you try to use 2 fingers and you touch at one point to hear for the heartbeat. You can hear the heart rate and you count it for 60 seconds. I'm sure you can feel it. You can try to do it now while you are watching this video, and you definitely can feel this. And the next one, what you can do is to listen to the sounds of valves closing. If your valves are working properly, blood will be traveling here in the right time, the right position, and everything. So that is something that we need to check. Okay, when you come for an examination at the clinic, they will check all of your parts of your heart through the chest. You may do not know where's the position of it, but the doctor knows. So where is it pointing is to see whether the valves are actually opening and closing. Because if you heard the heart as a loop doop, then these are the valves that are opening and closing. If there are abnormal sounds that they hear, it means that there are some problems in the function of the valves in the heart or other parts of the muscles. Okay, next, effects on physical activity. I'm sure you can name one physical activity like exercising. That's one. So when you're exercising, I'm sure you can feel your heart thumping very, very loud. It feels like beating so quick, okay, and fast. So why is this? So you can see increase in physical activity, there's an increased heart rate and breathing rate. You breathe more. You inhale and exhale more quickly than usual. So the heart rate remains high for a period of time, and after physical activity has stopped, there's a gradual return to your resting heart rate. Now, like when you're sitting down, you don't feel your heart beating that fast, okay? Because you're not doing anything to exert or give a stimulus towards the heart. It's that when you exercise, when you start moving quickly, then you can see your heart pumping quickly. And why is this? It's because your tissues needs oxygen. You want to supply oxygen towards this part, okay? And that is why your heart is pumping much faster, to send more blood to these areas. Okay, this is a condition which is known as a coronary heart disease. So one of the arteries that we need to know is that, remember that I know the aorta pumps blood to the body. Do you think blood is also pumped to the heart too? Yes, it's also. Okay, remember that the heart also needs oxygen, because you remember that heart is both a muscle and an organ. Okay, it's both a muscle and an organ. So a coronary artery is where it supplies blood towards the heart actually. So what happens during a disease? There's actually blockage in the artery's lumen. Lumen is a space. Okay, this is the lumen. So what you're seeing here, this is the lumen, the space for blood to move through. But what happens in a heart disease, that it forms like they have fatty deposits. Okay, what actually causes is that if you eat junk food every single day, if you eat a lot of fast food every single day, and what happens that after a long time is that there will be this sort of fatty depositions that will be built up on these lining of the blood vessels. And what happens when more of these comes? It starts to block the heart vessels, and your lumen becomes smaller. So what happens to this? When the radius becomes smaller, there will be more resistance. So this is some physics again. So again, smaller the vessel, the lesser blood can go through, because there's higher resistance, and your blood may need to pump more to overcome that resistance. So what happens to here? When it blocks, it interrupts blood supply, and what happens is stops contracting, and that will be one of the reasons that can cause a heart attack. So what are the risk factors? Diet, lack of exercise or sedentary lifestyle, stress, smoking, genetics can also play a part. If your parents have similar disease like a heart attack or all this kind of stuff, the chances of you having it in your later life are very, very high. So some of these are quite hard to be prevented, but it can be, at least, we can try to mediate the chances at least. Age and also gender, whether you are male or female. So this can be prevented by not smoking, avoiding fatty food means having a balanced diet, and also exercising very regularly. Okay, now we go through the blood vessels. I'm sure you have heard of these arteries, you heard of veins, you heard of the lumen and how it relates to resistance. Okay, now we are going to see the 3 different types of vessels at this chapter. So you're going to learn the structure of arteries, veins and capillaries. You also need to know relative to the thickness of their walls, the diameter of the lumen, and the presence of valves in the veins, function of the capillaries, and also to identify diagrams and images of blood vessels in different parts of the body, like the organs like that. So in extended students, you must know how the structure of the artery looks like, related to the pressure of how much they transported, how's the structure of the capillaries is related to their function, and also to identify more diagrams in different organs. Alright, the first one. So I'm sure you've heard of arteries. Arteries means that they travel blood away from the heart. So A to A. So what is the structure like? They are elastic tissues walls that stretch and relax as blood is forced out and causes a pulse. So thick walls. Okay, one thing to tell you is that arteries, they have much thicker walls. So similar to the concept of the left ventricles, they are also thick in nature, right? So they are able to pump blood more forcefully. So same thing, they can withstand higher pressure. Small lumen, so they have a much smaller lumen than usual. That's why in coronary artery disease, it's very easy for these blood vessels to get occluded, means or getting blocked. Why? It's because the lumen is much smaller. So when you have a lot of those fatty deposits start to build up on these vessels, then you can see that the radius of the blood vessel becomes much smaller. Then they easily get coronary artery disease. Okay, and I'm sure the small lumen will help to maintain the high blood pressure at some. That's one of the pros. The cons is that it's easily getting blocked. Next is the veins. So veins is the one that help to transport the deoxygenated blood back to the heart, back to the right atrium. Okay, to be more specific, I'm sure you know now the right atrium. So they transport low blood pressure blood. Okay, unlike the arteries, they transport high pressure blood because they are actually transporting the oxygenated blood. These are very important blood supplies. Okay, so valves will help to prevent the backflow of blood. So one significant feature that you can see between these three vessels is that the veins, right, have one specific thing, which is the valves. The valves, very similar function as the semilunar valve, the atrioventricular valve, is that they have valves which they prevent the backflow of blood. Okay, I hope this concept is crystal clear. So since you know that blood is pumped at lower pressure, and I'm sure you know that your legs also have veins, arteries also. But when it goes back to the heart, it's going against gravity. I'm sure you know gravity. It means that you fall because gravity is actually pulling you down. So how do the blood come from the legs to be pumped back to the heart? It will be all by the muscles that will be squeezing the veins. They will help to squeeze the veins. Okay, your muscles, let's say the muscles looks like this, they will help to squeeze. So they squeeze this part so that they can push blood back to the heart. So they have a wider lumen, okay, to reduce the resistance. Okay, so that's why very rarely, right, you have coronary vein disease. Very rare. Okay, why? Because the veins have much larger lumen and they do not really transport at significantly high pressure too. Next, capillaries. So capillaries are actually between arteries and veins. We'll see some pictures later. So what does it actually do? It allows substance to diffuse into the cell. So this comes back to your concept of diffusion. So diffusion can be your gases, your nutrients, very small nutrients that will be able to undergo this sort of nutrient exchange. Okay, so one cell thick wall, they have a one cell thick wall, okay, for easy diffusion, because remember, a thin layer will have faster diffusion. I'm sure you remember the factors that influence or increases the rate of diffusion. Comes back to this, a thinner layer. It's very highly branched. So when you know everything more branched, like your roots of the plant, where they are more network or they have more branches that's connecting to each other, they have always an increased surface area. And your capillary bed is constantly supplied with fresh blood, so diffusion can occur much quicker. Okay, so here is the diagrams that you can see. You do not have to know what is the endothelium, what's the adventitia, what is the basal lamina. What you need to know is how the smooth muscle difference is and how do they look like. How does the artery look like? How does the vein look like? So what you can see is that for the arteries, they have a much smaller lumen. The lumen is much thinner than comparing to the veins. I'm sure you can see the difference. But the key idea is a smooth muscle that is thicker in nature. You can see how thick the smooth muscle is. Okay, and what you can see also, the arteries, okay, they do not have branches, of course, so they don't really have much prominent branches, but you can see that they also will link to the capillaries. So what you can see, the capillaries, they have, remember, this is called as a single cell, okay, one cell thick layer, meaning like this is only one cell thick, while the arteries, there are many cells, okay, in one layer itself. All right, so it only can fit about, since it's one cell thick, it means it can only fit one cell. Okay, so that's why you can see, first of all, it is very branched, it's very network, so it has a larger surface area. Okay, so I'm sure this is quite clear to you. And next is the veins. So what you can see in the veins here, the smooth muscle is much thinner in nature. Okay, the smooth muscle is much thinner, and you can see there are valves. Okay, what's the function of the valves again? Is to prevent the backflow of blood. Remember this. Okay, this is very hot questions they love to ask in exam. And the lumen is big comparing to the arteries. So familiarize with this diagram. You don't need to know other things, you just need to know, come back to this. How does it relate to the structure? How does it relate to the function? Just remember this. I think it's always very sufficient. Okay, we need to go through the blood vessels in the kidney. So Same thing, your heart will pump all through the aorta and then it comes back to the vena cava. Remember that we also need to know that specific organs have their own supply too. So like for example, you need to know the renal artery, you need to know the renal vein. So I'm sure you can see the artery and the vein. That's what you need to know for now. We will come to this, I think, back in the excretion chapter again. Blood vessels in the liver, you need to know 3 types of vessels here. The hepatic artery, the vein, and the portal vein. One fun fact about this portal vein is that it actually doesn't need to go through your systemic circulation. Systemic means your whole entire body. It goes through, let's say, it wants to connect from the intestine to the, let's say, to the liver. It just goes through by the portal vein. It doesn't have to go to the main veins and then goes to the liver like this. It just go through this portal. It's called as a portal for a reason. Directly enters. Alright. Now we come to the blood. So you first of all need to list the components of blood. Okay, the different blood cells are here. Identify what are the red and white blood cells in photomicrographs. I will show you some few examples. State the functions of it. Again, structure and function. You can see bio, it's always these two, structure and function. Structure and function. And state the roles of blood clotting. We will look through at this. Okay. And lastly, we also need to know what's lymphocytes and phagocytes and its function. Okay, let's go to the main part. So, components of blood. There are 4 types of components that you need to know. First, red blood cell, white blood cell, platelets, and lastly, plasma. Okay, so I know it didn't mention plasma, but plasma is actually the liquid portion of the blood. I'm sure if you have ever drawn blood before or you have seen blood before, you can see it has a volume. What I need to tell you as a fun fact is that plasma actually takes up majority of that volume and red blood cells only 45%. Okay, so that is actually the key difference here. So red blood cells, first of all, I'm sure you heard of this before, biconcave. Biconcave is as a shape that it actually invaginates inside a little bit. It gives it that sort of inner curve inside there, and it stores hemoglobin and it does oxygen transport, or you can say transport oxygen. So again, structure and the function. White blood cells. White blood cells is mainly for phagocytosis or antibody production. I'm sure you do not know what's a phagocytosis now and what's an antibody, but we'll go through a little bit here. Then in the next chapter, when we talk about immunity, then we'll explore more on these 2 white blood cells again. Platelets, they allow blood clotting. So I'm sure you have had an injury before and blood starts bleeding. But have you ever realized that after some time, the blood starts to stop bleeding again? So blood clotting is here. Blood clot is to stop the blood from constantly leaving the body. Okay, so that it actually provides you a barrier to stop bleeding already. Okay, so this is with blood clotting. Just need to know a very tiny mechanism of this. And plasma is to transport, is the liquid portion of blood. They transport blood cells, ions, nutrients, urea, hormones, and CO2. That's it. Okay, this is what you need to know for here. Okay, so this is actually a photomicrograph. So when you see in a microscope, this is how red blood cells actually look like, how white blood cells look like. So this, I'm sure you know, this is a red blood cell. So you can see there's a biconcave area here. Okay, so now you see there's a lot of nucleated cells here. Okay, one thing I need to tell you is that red blood cells, they have no nucleus. So they have no nucleus. So they do not have a very dark spot like these 3 cells here. Okay, now I've mentioned in the learning outcomes that there's a lymphocyte and there's a phagocyte. So you need to know how to identify them. So one very easy way to know is that lymphocytes, they just have one big nucleus. This is a very big one. So I'm sure you know already which is it. This one. This is the lymphocyte. It has a very big dark circular nucleus. This is what it has. This is the most prominent feature that you can see. Another thing, this is the phagocytes. Phagocytes, they are multinucleated, meaning they have multiple nucleus. Okay, so that's just how you differentiate red blood cells, lymphocytes, phagocytes. Lymphocytes and phagocytes are a type of white blood cell. Okay, so we'll go through a little bit on this. So lymphocytes and a phagocyte. So I'm sure you can see here are some diagram pictures here of how a lymphocyte will look like. Big nucleus, and a phagocyte with having multinucleated, many nucleus. So a phagocyte is a lobe, irregular C-shaped nucleus and vesicles containing digestive enzymes. So I'm sure you know what it does it do now. Phagocytosis. Okay, so phagocytosis is like they're eating up something. Okay, like how can I say? Like when it encounters a bacteria, it needs to kill the bacteria. That's the whole goal of the white blood cell. So phagocytosis will grab the bacteria and pull it inside the white blood cell, the phagocyte itself, and it will release the enzymes to start breaking it down. So I'm sure you're familiar with enzymes, right? Okay, it breaks down something, it increases the rate of reaction. So same thing, digestive enzyme will actually break down the bacteria and eventually it kills it. So that is what a phagocytosis is. And there's antigens. So antigens, they are found on the surface of these pathogens like your bacteria, your virus. So these are the identification markers that, oh, this bacteria is having this particular antigen. Once your body knows that, oh, I've seen this before, or this is something new, but no matter what, you're still gonna die. Okay, so it's always the white blood cells are programmed to kill. So they use the antigens to detect, like, okay, you are not part of us. It's time to eliminate you. That is his whole goal. And the lymphocyte has a circular nucleus and are found in blood. But what the lymphocytes cannot do is they cannot undergo phagocytosis. Instead, they are more of the scaredy cats. But they actually play a very, very big role. They actually produce what we know as antibodies. I'm sure you have taken vaccination before, taken the COVID-19 vaccine, or taken the when you are young, when you are still a baby, you take a lot of jabs, okay? So all of these, they contain what we know as antibodies. These antibodies will almost act like antigens, but they won't harm you by causing fever or causing any sort of very severe symptoms. Instead, they train your body to how to fight this infection when you actually encounter the real virus, the real bacteria. So antibodies, they are Y-shaped proteins that bind to label pathogens and they are marking for destruction. So they will be degraded, but your immune system is very smart. They will learn them. They will learn, okay, I've seen you before. Okay, I will learn and study how you look like. So when you come again next time, I will kill you. That is the whole goal. That is the whole idea, the whole gist of this lymphocyte versus the phagocyte. Last one, blood clotting. So I'm sure you know that when you bleed, blood has to stop coming out, because if you lose too much blood, it's a dangerous sign in your body. So the whole purpose of the blood clot is to reduce blood flow and is to keep pathogens out. So what's the process? You need to know the process of it. So it converts fibrinogen to fibrin. Then it forms a mesh. So you can see this sort of tiny strings here. These are a mesh, and they will help to trap red blood cell and to eventually dry up and to form a scab. So eventually you can see it actually forms a smooth white layer that, you know, blood cannot come out at all. Why? It's because this is a mesh that's been created from this blood clotting process. So I'm sure you know, what is fibrinogen? What is fibrin? So these are the materials that actually help to form the mesh. And why does it have to convert from here to that? Because fibrinogen is water soluble. It means it can actually dissolve in blood. But when it becomes fibrin is the insoluble form. So now that's why you can see that thread-like things. Initially, you're not supposed to see this. If you see this in your blood, there will be problems. So this fibrin is insoluble now. So now you can see them and they actually trap them like a net. They keep the blood from coming out again. Okay? So yes, if you have any questions, do in the comment section below. I know this is a very heavy chapter, so I hope you actually learned something. And yeah, see you in the next video, and thank you so much for watching again. Bye bye.